Gabriel Hetland, who teaches Latin American Studies at the State University of New York at Albany. Thank you for joining us. Tell us, what is exactly at stake here in Sunday's election, since voters electing a new Congress with expanded constitutional powers? What are the ramifications?
I hope it doesn't happen, but potential for civil war is very real in Venezuela. Both sides are really digging in their heels and going sort of full speed towards the abyss. So trying to avert that, I think, is a priority right now.
So the opposition is calling for the extended demonstrations despite this ban on the protests until after the election. They're calling this the taking of Venezuela. What kind of tone is this actually setting?
I don't think it's helpful. I mean, the opposition's behavior over the last 3.5 months has alternated between often peaceful protest and really sort of upping the ante through violent protest. The opposition has not shown the disposition it needs to actually engage in dialogue. They've repeatedly just called essentially for Nicolas Maduro, who, for better or worse, remains the democratically elected president of Venezuela, to resign immediately, something that the government would never agree to have happen. So I think that the opposition certainly bears a high degree of responsibility for the chaos and anarchy that's happening in Venezuela right now. That said, the government also is digging in its heels and putting all of its marbles in this basket of the Constituent Assembly, which isn't going to address the real problems in the country, in particular the devastating economic crisis that's really making life incredibly difficult for ordinary Venezuelans for years now.
Gabriel, let's talk about how desperate the people of Venezuela are. We've seen them, lose their lives in the street. There have been kidnappings. People are willing to go out and protest and risk their lives to get out of the current situation they're in.
Yeah, the situation is very, very difficult. There's been unofficial surveys suggesting that up to 80% of the population has lost significant weight, 7 or 8 kilos, which is about 20 pounds. It's incredibly difficult to get access to basic goods, food, medicine. So it's really a very, very difficult situation on the ground. It's important to note, though, who is doing the protesting. And the leadership of the protest is the sort of traditional political class in Venezuela that's been out of power for most of the last 2 decades, and which has been, for most of that period, absolutely desperate to get back into power. Who is not protesting as much so far are the popular sectors. There's been many acts of looting, some sort of sporadic, spontaneous protests that are certainly holding the government accountable for the economic crisis. But by and large, the popular sectors have not joined the large opposition protest. And surveys suggest that they're also, very much in disagreement with the idea of using violence. Most Venezuelans want a peaceful solution to the current crisis, and the leading sectors of the opposition have not been willing to put that forward.
Quickly, tell us about bilateral relations with Colombia in light of this vote.
The relationship of Venezuela and Colombia has been tense for most of the last several decades, the last 20 years under Chavez and Maduro. At times, the relationship has been better, at times worse. Right now, it seems like the relationship is taking a dive for the worse. So the president of Colombia, Santos, has said that he will not respect the results of the Constituent Assembly vote happening tomorrow. And I think that, it's understandable that there would be criticism of the Constituent Assembly. Surveys suggest that the vast majority of Venezuelans aren't in agreement with it as a solution to the country's problems. But I think for countries neighboring Venezuela to sort of take that hard attitude isn't necessarily helpful in this moment. We really need a cooling of temperatures, and that's the only path forward.
Well, we're certainly hoping for the best. Gabriel Hetland, thank you for joining us live in New York City.